In his house, he seated him on the sofa and invited him to exercise before eating. Initially, he refused, but because he was so beautiful and charming, he eventually agreed. He can't believe that becoming a butler was just an excuse to do this with him. Flashback to a few months ago. Lee Jin-won, 29 years old, was unemployed and searching for a new job. Lee Jin-won's life had been tumultuous, from his first company going bankrupt in less than 3 months of work to the second company where he was fired for a minor mistake imposed by his supervisor. Currently, he is preparing for a civil service exam and feeling immense pressure. All his hopes rested on this to avoid previous pitfalls. However, fate didn't smile upon him as he fell short by 0.1 points to pass the exam. Failing to achieve the desired result, he resorted to working temporarily in a coffee shop, trying to change his fate. While many could easily recognize this, he didn't want to burden his sister and didn't want to leverage family connections to achieve something. During a meal, breaking news unexpectedly reported a 10-fold increase in the difficulty of the LV9 civil service exam. This news stunned and saddened him as he was only 0.1 points away from passing. Without much delay, he decided to take on extra work for income and explore new opportunities. During a conversation with his aunt and sister, he was advised to seek additional employment. His sister emphasized the importance of stability in marriage being tied to a stable job. He blamed his sister, but she remained cheerful and confident that she had found the right job for him. Following her advice, he visited another house, where he met a handsome young man waiting. He introduced himself as Jin-won, the brother of your dad's wife. The young man suddenly referred to him as uncle, making him realize that he had become the uncle of his sister's stepson. Then the young man said, "Don't call yourself as my uncle witch's brother." Lee Jin-won was startled to hear rumors that the young master and his sister weren't getting along, but he hadn't anticipated the young master's prickly demeanor. Without waiting for Lee Jin-won to say much, the young master called him in to work immediately because he was hungry. Lee Jin-won asked if the young master was Gyunga, then said, "I'll start preparing dinner after I finish unpacking and need to go grocery shopping." The young master stood up, approached Lee Jin-won, and said, "You shouldn't go around calling anyone by their name, because the young master doesn't like strangers being too familiar." Calling him by his name made the young master uncomfortable because it was a privilege of the wealthy. Lee Jin-won asked what he should call the young master, and the young master confidently replied that he should call him master. The master said that since Lee Jin-won came here to be a butler, he should address the young master as such. The master warned Lee Jin-won that if dinner wasn't ready before he finished bathing, he would be angry. He turned away, leaving Lee Jin-won with a bewildered expression. Lee Jin-won had to endure the discomfort of serving in the household of the bourgeoisie. Lee Jin-won's sister talked about family life. "My husband has a child with his previous wife, and that child doesn't like me." My husband's sister and his family supported Lee Jin-won's sister, but Gyunga didn't accept Lee Jin-won's sister. Lee Jin-won understood why Gyunga didn't like his sister, as she was older than Gyunga and became his stepmother. Lee Jin-won's sister talked about Gyunga leaving and seeming to have found a new place with his own bank card. A few days ago, Gyunga had listened to Lee Jin-won's sister, so she thought Gyunga was more open to her. But on Gyunga's birthday, he disappeared. Lee Jin-won encouraged his sister, but Lee Jin-won's sister talked about the difficulty of accepting Gyunga's rejection. She felt sorry for Gyunga's father, who wanted to organize a birthday dinner for his son. Lee Jin-won endured to help his sister, even though Gyunga didn't want it. After dinner, Lee Jin-won looked at Gyunga for a long time, making Gyunga uncomfortable. Gyunga asked Lee Jin-won, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Lee Jin-won said, "Because I find you handsome and gentle, unlike your father." Gyunga said, "Because I'm like my mother," and felt like Lee Jin-won was meeting a celebrity. Lee Jin-won switched to talking about Gyunga's height, and Gyunga seemed unhappy, telling Lee Jin-won that he was just bothering Gyunga. Lee Jin-won apologized and got up to leave. Lee Jin-won found it difficult to persuade Gyunga to make it to their morning appointment on time. Thinking about this, Lee Jin-won turned back and saw Gyunga standing behind him. Upon arriving, Lee Jin-won saw Gyunga with a red mark on his lip, and his shirt torn from the fight. Lee Jin-won handed Gyunga his belongings and then scolded Gyunga vigorously. Lee Jin-won yelled at Gyunga, "You didn't even visit your grandpa when he was discharged from the hospital. Now you've been arrested for fighting. I thought you had stopped acting like a child, but I didn't expect you to get into fights." As Lee Jin-won was reprimanding Gyunga, a police officer intervened and said that Lee Jin-won had misunderstood Gyunga. Gyunga was actually attacked by these two individuals. Seo Jaeung-ha had gone to this girl's house for dinner and was attacked by her boyfriend, believing that Gyunga and the girl had done something behind his back. After everything was sorted out, Gyunga changed clothes, and then Lee Jin-won took him home and forgave the other two. Lee Jin-won asked Gyunga if he knew the girl, to which Gyunga replied no. Then Lee Jin-won said, "So you just went there to eat then?" Gyunga said, "That's right, because you took my card, so I had no choice but to eat there." Getting into the car, Gyunga told Lee Jin-won not to misunderstand and explained that he had planned to have dinner and return before 10 o'clock. In reality, he didn't know where else to go. He said this was a situation he hadn't anticipated, so he couldn't do anything about it, and it wasn't like he trusted everyone to go to their homes. Seeing his mistake, Lee Jin-won apologized to Gyunga. He apologized for what he said at the police station, admitting he shouldn't have yelled at Gyunga like that. Gyunga looked at Lee Jin-won and said, "You don't need to apologize to me. I don't care what you think or what happens. I will just tell your sister about it. I don't want to be scolded for things I didn't do. It makes me feel like there's a battle raging inside me." Lee Jin-won sighed and said, "My life isn't easy either." He asked Gyunga, "Do you feel like you're going through a hard time? Then why don't you try putting yourself in my shoes right now? My duty is to protect someone like you, so why should I report back to my sister?" Gyunga turned back with an incredulous look as if to say, "What is this guy talking about?" "Exactly," Lee Jin-won continued. So Lee Jin-won hoped that Gyunga wouldn't see him as inferior in the future. Upon arriving home, Lee Jin-won had hoped things would be different, but everything remained the same. Gyunga kept complaining, and Lee Jin-won kept being awkward. Then Lee Jin-won thought to himself, Gyunga is still a brat with an unpleasant face. The next day, Lee Jin-won had never seen Gyunga eat without complaining. He always ate right on time, chewing each bite over 20 times. It was impressive. After school, Gyunga went straight home and went to bed at 11 o'clock. Seeing this, Lee Jin-won felt confused and questioned his existence, wondering if Gyunga was a human or a robot. Lee Jin-won replied, "Yeah, I was thinking of organizing a small drinking party. It seems like a good opportunity for everyone to get to know each other better. Drinking is also a good way to relieve stress and create a cheerful atmosphere." Gyunga said, "But I told you I don't drink, right?" Lee Jin-won looked at Gyunga and said, "That's right, but not drinking doesn't mean you can't participate. I can arrange alternative drinks for you if you want." After a moment of thought, Gyunga said, "Okay, but don't force me to drink too much." Lee Jin-won smiled. "Of course, I would never force anyone to do something they don't want to do. Let's just have a fun and friendly drinking party." Gyunga looked at Lee Jin-won and said, "Thank you for understanding and accepting. You seem different from before." Lee Jin-won nodded. "We understand each other better now, don't we? Hopefully, things will get better after the party." Lee Jin-won said, "This is the part that I've prepared for you." It was time for Gyunga to change in a new direction, and this is called the world of adults. Gyunga said, "I don't want to drink because I don't like it, and it's not good for me." Lee Jin-won said, "It's okay. You won't drink much." Gyunga even added, "I've never been drunk when drinking." Hearing Gyunga say that, Lee Jin-won's eyes lit up brightly, sparkling and shimmering as if Lee Jin-won had found the love of his life. Despite Gyunga's continuous refusal, Lee Jin-won remained adamant, wanting Gyunga to drink. It would only stop when Gyunga agreed to drink. Then what happened next? Lee Jin-won got totally drunk. That's what. And Gyunga? Still sober, as stiff as a robot. Gyunga glanced at Lee Jin-won and said, "I wonder how you'll be when you're drunk. I can't imagine it." Saying that, suddenly Lee Jin-won approached Gyunga, gently took their hand, and held it tightly. Then, Lee Jin-won leaned their face close to Gyunga's. Lee Jin-won kept advancing towards Gyunga, his hand touching Gyunga's hand as he said, "We shouldn't do things that make both of us uncomfortable. Why don't we try to become good friends? You seem like you don't have anyone to be friends with. I may look older, but in reality, I look way much younger than you, Gyunga. I don't think it's difficult for both of us to become close friends. Your face seems bitter already." Then, Gyunga kicked Lee Jin-won with a swift blow, feeling sorry for him. Lee Jin-won turned back and asked Gyunga if he was wary of him, not wanting them to become closer. Gyunga said he had nothing to be wary of Lee Jin-won, because Lee Jin-won was too foolish. Gyunga said Lee Jin-won was drunk and should stay away. Lee Jin-won insisted he wasn't drunk and spat out his saliva all over Gyunga's face. Lee Jin-won chuckled triumphantly, wiping Gyunga's face with his shirt. Then he reached out and held Gyunga's face, saying, "You look handsome. It's a pity your face only appears indoors." Gyunga told Lee Jin-won to get out, but Lee Jin-won said to let him stay a little longer. He looked at Gyunga tenderly and then asked if Gyunga thought Lee Jin-won's sister had taken the place of Gyunga's mother. That was the reason Lee Jin-won came here to help her. Yes, that could only be the reason. Gyunga asked why Lee Jin-won asked that because it didn't seem to have anything to do with Gyunga's mother. Gyunga had never thought his mother was the one being kicked out of the house for breaking the rules. After that, the two continued drinking, and Lee Jin-woo suddenly asked why Gyunga hated Lee Jin-woo's sister so much. Gyunga said he disliked people he didn't know well suddenly coming into his house and acting friendly towards him. He felt like Lee Jin-woo's sister had some ulterior motive by pretending to be friendly. Lee Jin-woo explained to him that there was no reason for Lee Jin-woo and his sister to behave like that. No matter how much Gyunga disliked it, Lee Jin-woo's sister was still his stepmother, and he was still her child, so he couldn't deny that. Gyunga felt uncomfortable when Lee Jin-woo referred to his sister as his mother, and then Gyunga said, "You can think however you want, just don't act like nothing happened. Even this face is starting to annoy me." The next morning, Lee Jin-woo's alarm clock kept ringing, but Lee Jin-woo still didn't wake up. Seeing this, Gyunga took his phone and held it close to Lee Jin-woo's ear, and it was only then that Lee Jin-woo startled awake. He told Lee Jin-woo that the alarm had been ringing, so Lee Jin-woo had to wake up, and then he asked Lee Jin-woo to make breakfast for him. Lee Jin-woo replied that today was Sunday so he could eat whatever he wanted, right? While making breakfast, he pondered over the things Gyunga had said the previous evening. Somehow, Gyunga acted as if nothing had happened, or perhaps it was because Lee Jin-woo was drunk. Remembering the words, "Even this face is starting to annoy me," Lee Jin-woo turned to Gyunga and asked if he didn't like Lee Jin-woo's face. Gyunga choked on his food, then turned to Lee Jin-woo with an embarrassed expression, asking what he was talking about, and if someone had said last night that Lee Jin-woo's face was annoying. Lee Jin-woo asked Gyunga why he disliked Lee Jin-woo's face. Gyunga claimed it was the beer talking, not him. Lee Jin-woo felt like he was stealing Gyunga's girlfriend. The reason Lee Jin-woo was fired from his previous job was because his superior's ex-girlfriend cheated on him with someone who resembled Lee Jin-woo. So Lee Jin-woo thought his face caused trouble. Lee Jin-woo even considered getting plastic surgery. Gyunga disagreed, telling Lee Jin-woo to stop thinking about such things. However, Lee Jin-woo still didn't give up on the idea of getting cosmetic surgery to have a handsome face like Gyunga's. But Gyunga said that girls would prefer Lee Jin-woo's face because he had a very handsome face. Pleased with the compliment, Lee Jin-woo was very happy and continued with his work. Lee Jin-woo took out his books to study, but couldn't focus. He decided to cook something instead. He asked if Gyunga wanted to eat anything, but at that moment, Gyunga was busy talking to his father. Gyunga said he wouldn't come, as he had already given them their own space. What more did they want? He mentioned that his father seemed uneasy again and told him not to say it was because of him. It was all because of his father. He asked his father to forget about him and to live his own life. Lee Jin-woo stepped forward and told him that he thought his behavior was unreasonable. Lee Jin-woo knew he wasn't qualified to give advice, but he believed that Gyunga's father and Gyunga were a good match. No matter how angry he was at his father, he shouldn't speak to him like that. He would surely regret it later. The person Gyunga hated was Lee Jin-woo's sister, not his father. Lee Jinwoo said his father had chosen Gyunga's sister, and he mentioned that his father had been lonely and would be happier if they all lived together. Would his father not be happy living with him? He would be happier living with Lee Jinwoo's sister, but Gyunga would rather die than live with her. He hated everything, and his sister made him uncomfortable. Just seeing them made him feel disgusted and want to go mad. Lee Jinwoo approached again, gently tapping Gyunga's forehead to calm him down, as he looked like a child throwing a tantrum because another woman had stolen his father. Children might behave that way, but Gyunga was an adult now, already 20 years old. Lee Jinwoo advised him with what he had and asked if Gyunga had ever thought of trying to understand her. Suddenly, Gyunga left the house and decided he wouldn't change his mind. Lee Jinwoo told him that Lee Jinwoo's sister was very kind, very caring towards him, and Lee Jinwoo wanted him to give her a chance. Lee Jinwoo said he didn't need to worry because Lee Jinwoo's sister had always liked older people, not gold diggers. After Lee Jinwoo's touching advice, Gyunga decided he would go, but not now. He wanted to visit his family on his late grandfather's Memorial Day, and then Lee Jinwoo hugged him gently. The Memorial Day arrived, and Lee Jinwoo prepared everything for him like a couple would. Gyunga said he would be back soon, and then Lee Jinwoo happily saw him off to his own home. At the funeral, Gyunga received attention from everyone, and they hoped he would attend regularly because his grandpa cherished him greatly. Later, his father and stepmother arrived, and he greeted them before they all went inside. He had pondered quite a bit as he watched them happily interacting. After using the restroom and washing his face, he came out to find Lee Jinwoo's sister waiting for him. She said she was glad to see him there and apologized for making him uncomfortable as his stepmother. Gyunga realized that both Lee Jinwoo and his sister were straightforward individuals. Gyunga said he wouldn't avoid her anymore and wouldn't stand in her way either. She smiled and expressed her hope that he would be happy because he was the son of the man she loved. Although Gyunga thought things would make him feel more comfortable, they didn't. Everything felt painful. Returning home with a sorrowful expression, Lee Jinwoo noticed and asked why his face looked so shattered. It was then that Gyunga realized he had loved Lee Jinwoo's sister for a long time, ever since the day he first met her. He felt despondent and began to cry, and Lee Jinwoo sat beside him and comforted him, saying that if he accepted letting go, everything would be okay. That's how life was. Feeling disappointed, Gyunga decided he didn't want to love anyone anymore. Then Lee Jinwoo told him not to be too pessimistic because he never knew who might be his future partner. Lee Jinwoo spoke whimsically and then told him to forget about those things. Gyunga remarked that Lee Jinwoo's words were wonderful, and that night the two shared secrets with each other. Since that day, Gyunga often visited Lee Jinwoo's house. After hearing Lee Jinwoo's deep words, he also knew what Lee Jinwoo would do that day. He enjoyed the feeling of Lee Jinwoo caring for him. When he arrived at his father's house, Gyunga felt that the house was now truly a home. Previously, Gyunga's mother often caused trouble for the family. Before their divorce, they would often avoid each other and stay in their rooms. Gyunga felt that his home at that time was no different from an abandoned house, but he preferred quiet moments like this rather than arguing. Gyunga had wished that his mother would stay in that room forever. What he had before was not a real family. After finishing the meal, Gyunga went home and drank beer with Lee Jinwoo, then recounted his terrible meal. He said he had never eaten such a disgusting meal before. In one breath, Lee Jinwoo discovered a very important issue. Gyunga didn't know what to release meant. Lee Jinwoo couldn't believe it and found it incredibly amusing. According to Lee Jinwoo, about 96% of men usually release, and Gyunga belongs to the remaining 4%. Seeing this, Lee Jinwoo didn't hesitate to provoke him, but Gyunga pushed him away and then left. Lee Jinwoo felt he might have gone too far this time, but he also confirmed that Gyunga's thing was quite large. That night, while Gyunga was sleeping, Lee Jinwoo suddenly entered his room. When Gyunga opened his eyes, he saw Lee Jinwoo lying under his blanket. Gyunga asked Lee Jinwoo what he was doing in his room, and Lee Jinwoo reached out to touch that of Gyunga's. Gyunga jerked back and pushed Lee Jinwoo away, but Lee Jinwoo continued to tease him. Then Lee Jinwoo showed Gyunga what to release meant. Afterward, Lee Jin-woo said, "How dare I do that to Gyunga?" Lee Jin-woo talked about what caring meant, saying it was a dream, and then in the dream, Lee Jin-woo wished Gyunga his first experience. Teasingly. Sitting up, his face bewildered and crestfallen, Gyunga pulled back the blanket, finding his clothes clean, but his underwear wet. He left the room in search of Lee Jin-woo, with a face full of confusion, unable to believe it was a dream. He reached out to touch Lee Jin-woo with his hand. Gyunga gently pinched Lee Jin-woo's lips and then reached out to check for something, but found nothing he was looking for. Disappointed, he resorted to kicking instead. He was glad that after that night, Lee Jin-woo didn't appear in his dreams anymore. The next morning, after changing clothes, he realized he had lost a shirt button, so he called for Lee Jin-woo. Lee Jin-woo was brushing his teeth, with foam still clinging to his mouth. Seeing this, Gyunga immediately remembered the dream from the previous night and quickly left. Since that day, Gyunga felt that Lee Jin-woo looked handsome no matter what he did, even while sewing. Feeling embarrassed, he asked Lee Jin-woo to do it instead, and then he noticed the thread from Lee Jin-woo's mouth, which had been there. Startled, he threw it away and looked for another spool of thread. Determined not to let such a situation happen again, he decided to pour all of Lee Jin-woo's beer into the last can. Lee Jin-woo daringly grabbed it but ended up spilling it all over himself. Seeing such a suggestive scene, Gyunga disappeared like a ghost. Lee Jin-woo cleaned up until 2 a.m. and then decided to watch TV for entertainment. Unexpectedly, the show turned out to be about pigs, of all things. Thinking back, it had been a while since Lee Jin-woo had done it, and this was the perfect time to do it now. While Lee Jin-woo was doing it, Gyunga was startled awake and walked out. Upon seeing Lee Jin-woo, Gyunga thought he would disappear like a ghost, but this time he stayed to watch. Lord, his little brother reacted. Early in the morning, Lee Jin-woo called him to wake up and asked why he wasn't sleeping on the bed but sitting right by the door. This time, Gyunga thought it was just a dream and that he should do what he wanted to do with Lee Jin-woo and start enlightening his own path. Upon opening his eyes, the disappointment still lingered on Gyunga's face. He looked down at his pants and they seemed slightly wet, just as he thought, a sign of a wet dream. Lee Jin-woo set out the food, but Gyunga's eyes kept lingering on him. Gyunga couldn't believe he had dreamt about Lee Jin-woo in the same dream 3 times. Suddenly, Lee Jin-woo turned to look at him and asked if he wanted more to eat. Lee Jin-woo remembered earlier when he couldn't find Gyunga's underwear while doing laundry. Lee Jin-woo didn't understand why Gyunga's underwear would disappear like that, and Gyunga asked why Lee Jin-woo kept talking about his underwear like that. Lee Jin-woo planned to buy a new pair and asked Gyunga what size he would wear. Gyunga said he didn't know, and Lee Jin-woo planned to pull Gyunga's pants down to check. Gyunga, startled, covered himself, and said he would buy it himself. Lee Jin-woo sat down and looked up at Gyunga, noticing a slight blush on his face. Lee Jin-woo asked if he was sick, noticing dark circles under Gyunga's eyes and his skin looking worse. Gyunga pushed Lee Jin-woo's hand away, saying he wasn't Lee Jin-woo's pet, so don't touch him like that all the time. Lee Jin-woo said it was a way of showing affection within a family. However, Gyunga pushed him away and Lee Jin-woo looked a bit angry, but he had to continue working. As Lee Jin-woo washed the dishes, Gyunga opened the door and left. Then he apologized to Lee Jin-woo for being so tired these days, which is why he acted like that. Gyunga tried to talk to Lee Jin-woo, but he didn't want to talk much because he was still angry. Lee Jin-woo decided to show Gyunga that a house should have a roof. Lee Jin-woo would show Gyunga that he wasn't someone to be bullied, and Uncle Lee Jin-woo had shown his anger by staying silent. In the evening, Lee Jin-woo left a note saying his friend had passed the interview, so he went to congratulate them. Gyunga sat there, eating and confiding in his friend. After finishing his overtime, when Lee Jin-woo returned home, he saw Gyunga waiting for him on the sofa. Lee Jin-woo thought if he passed the exam, he would have very little time to talk to Gyunga. Lee Jin-woo said he would stop being angry with Gyunga because he was Lee Jin-woo's first nephew. So Lee Jin-woo decided to talk straight to Gyunga and make peace. Lee Jin-woo said Gyunga came closer so he could pat his head, but Gyunga moved away. Lee Jin-won told him he knew Gyunga was avoiding him, and didn't think he didn't know. Lee Jin-won said he showers every day and doesn't smell bad at all. Lee Jin-won accidentally touched Gyunga. Then Gyunga said, "You're getting too close to me. And I can smell you." Lee Jin-won, "I can smell alcohol in your breath." Then, Gyunga immediately remembered his dreams. He muttered that he couldn't do this wasn't a dream. If Lee Jin-won continued to get close like this, he felt like he might do things with Lee Jin-won like in his dreams. At this point, Gyunga couldn't hold back anymore. He leaned in to kiss Lee Jin-won, who startled and pulled away, but Gyunga pulled Lee Jin-won back forcefully and kissed him again. Lee Jin-won pushed him away again. "Oh my God, are you crazy? Why would you do that to me?" Lee Jin-won said. It was only then that Gyunga admitted he always dreamed of such things, and Lee Jin-won was always in those dreams. Lee Jin-won stood frozen for 5 seconds, then asked why Gyunga dreamt of him like that. Gyunga said he didn't know, but he liked kissing Lee Jin-won like that and felt like he could do other things in dreams. Lee Jin-won, too scared, ran into his room and locked the door. The next morning, while taking Gyunga to school, Gyunga told Lee Jin-won not to act like he didn't know anything about yesterday. Lee Jin-won said he didn't know anything at all. Gyunga asked if he needed to remind Lee Jin-won about it. Lee Jin-won didn't know why Gyunga had such dreams, but that didn't mean Gyunga liked Lee Jin-won. Lee Jin-won told Gyunga that he was straight, continuously avoiding the issue. But when Gyunga said Lee Jin-won was very attractive, Lee Jin-won collapsed for a few seconds. Lee Jin-won told him that he was just caught up in the moment. Suddenly, Gyunga called Lee Jin-won by his name. Gyunga liked Lee Jin-won. He was struggling with his emotions, didn't reject his feelings, and didn't think his feelings for Lee Jin-won weren't real. It hurt him. After Gyunga went to school, Lee Jin-won sat in the car with many thoughts. Lee Jin-won thought Gyunga blamed him because he had a face very similar to his sister's. Too tired of this, it could only be solved this way. Lee Jin-won arranged to meet Gyujong and help him move house. Gyujong asked Lee Jin-won what he wanted to eat, and Lee Jin-won asked him back, "Should I get plastic surgery? Do you think your brother could give me a discount?" Gyujong asked what was going on, and Lee Jin-won started telling Gyujong everything, and he was very interested in this story. Then he told Lee Jin-won that he could find his friends and introduce them to each other. Perhaps that person would agree because they are more handsome and younger than Lee Jin-won. Then, Lee Jin-won took Gyunga to a bar and wanted to introduce women to him. Lee Jin-won pulled him in when he didn't want to. Gyunga said he would leave first, and Lee Jin-won pulled him back and begged him. Gyunga softened at his urgent face. He asked Lee Jin-won what he would give him if he followed Lee Jin-won's will. After saying that, Lee Jin-won took him to a corner, kissed him and said to Gyunga, "I've kissed you, so you can." Before Lee Jin-won finished speaking, Gyunga pinned him down and kissed him back. Lee Jin-won gently hit Gyunga, saying, "We're out in public. We can't do that." But wait, didn't Lee Jin-won just kiss Gyunga? Well, there's a difference between kissing on the lips and kissing on the cheek. Lee Jin-won then told Gyunga to quickly come inside, and once inside, they looked around again. Gyunga seemed uncomfortable, saying he didn't like crowds and wanted to leave. Lee Jin-won insisted, reminding him that he promised to stay with him. Gyunga then told Lee Jin-won that he only promised to stay with him for 30 minutes. Lee Jin-won couldn't believe it. A kiss only bought him 30 minutes. Then, Lee Jin-won took Gyunga to the bar and handed him a cocktail. After drinking it, Lee Jin-won pretended to go to the restroom and secretly watched him from a distance. Now that Lee Jin-won had successfully persuaded Gyunga to stay, the most important thing was that no girl approached Gyunga. While worrying about this, 2 girls approached and talked to Lee Jin-won. Lee Jin-won brought them back to Gyunga, but in Gyunga's eyes, there was only Lee Jin-won. Then, one of the girls approached Lee Jin-won and asked him to switch seats with her. Gyunga didn't want Lee Jin-won to switch seats and pulled him back down. The girl seemed annoyed and spoke in a reproachful manner. Then, Gyunga bluntly told her that he didn't like her, didn't like the way she talked, and her perfume was too strong, making him feel nauseous. Regardless of how much she flirted with Gyunga, he had Lee Jin-won. Before he could finish, Lee Jin-won quickly covered his mouth. Lee Jin-won apologized to the two girls and explained that Gyunga was drunk and not paying attention to what he was saying. Lee Jin-won invited them for a drink as an apology, but the girl declined, saying she didn't need it and didn't want to meet someone like him. Glancing at the girl, Gyunga said, "Acting like I like her too." Furious, she stormed off. The plan failed. Lee Jin-won didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Gyunga kept squeezing Lee Jin-won's thigh, commenting on how soft it was. Lee Jin-won grabbed his collar and said, "Are you drunk?" Gyunga insisted he wasn't completely sober. Lee Jin-won turned around to see Gyunga drinking a few glasses. Yeah, a few glasses. Along with an innocent, guilty face, Gyunga handed the bill to Lee Jin-won. Frustrated, Lee Jin-won finished the remaining drinks and ended up leaning on Gyunga. Gyunga took Lee Jin-won to a hotel and sat him down on the sofa. Seeing Lee Jin-won like this, he urged him to wake up and told him to quickly get into bed. He was too drunk, but Lee Jin-won refused to wake up and go. So Gyunga had to support him and put him on the bed. Just as he was about to lay Lee Jin-won down, Lee Jin-won turned around, hugged and kissed Gyunga on the cheek, then pushed him down, accidentally touching that of his. Unable to resist, Gyunga pinned him down and attempted to do that with Lee Jin-won. The two of them spent a passionate night together, leaving spectators in awe. Tonight still stretched long, and the two of them continued to immerse themselves in their own private space. The next morning, when Gyunga woke up, he saw Lee Jin-won's face with a look of sheer panic. Remembering everything, Lee Jin-won felt too embarrassed, so he hid in the bathroom. When it was time to eat, Lee Jin-won told Gyunga that he misunderstood what happened last night. Lee Jin-won had no intention of sleeping with him because Lee Jin-won didn't feel that way about him at all. Lee Jin-won said if Gyunga wanted, Lee Jin-won could wait. So Lee Jin-won hoped Gyunga would just pretend like nothing happened last night. Gyunga thought Lee Jin-won was an honest person, so did Lee Jin-won sleep with someone else and then reject them? Lee Jin-won said it wasn't like that. Gyunga then asked why Lee Jin-won refused. Was Gyunga just a joke to Lee Jin-won? Lee Jin-won said it wasn't like that. Although they were not blood-related, Lee Jin-won and Gyunga had a familial relationship. How could they date? After going back and forth for a while, Gyunga decided to give Lee Jin-won time, and he would wait until Lee Jin-won started to like him. So Lee Jin-won shouldn't have any absurd ideas and had to stay by Gyunga's side. If Lee Jin-won tried to run away from Gyunga, Gyunga would pin Lee Jin-won down and exhaust Lee Jin-won again. As Jin-won made his way home, the weight of the exam still hung heavy on his mind like a stubborn fog refusing to dissipate. With each step, he replayed the questions in his head, second-guessing his answers and wondering about the outcome. Maybe the score isn't much different from last time. I'm not sure what I did in the exam anymore. The bustling streets around him seemed to blur into a hazy backdrop as his thoughts consumed him. Lost in his own world, Jin-won found himself retracing the events of the morning. The memory of Gyunga's words echoed in his mind like a persistent refrain, stirring a curious mix of anticipation and apprehension within him. Gyunga said he intended to pick up Jin-won after Gyunga finished some errands. Jin-won said, "No need. I can take the high-speed train." As Jin-won was about to leave, Gyunga pulled Jin-won's hand back and said, "When you finish the exam, remember to come home immediately. I have something for you." That sentence made Jin-won unable to stop thinking about it during the exam. As he walked, Jin-won's thoughts darted back and forth between the exam and Gyunga's mysterious promise. The anticipation gnawed at him, fueling a sense of eagerness tinged with uncertainty. As Jin-won was about to board the train, Liucong, Jin-won's friend, called. Jin-won picked up the phone and said, "Oh, it's you." On the other end, Liucong said, "Huh? Yes, it's me. Who were you expecting?" Jin-won, startled, stuttered and said, "No, I wasn't expecting anyone to call." Liucong asked in confusion, "Are you 20-year-old, huh? Huh? What's going on? Do you have a girlfriend? Right, huh?" Jin-won panicked. "What? No. What are you talking about? Why did you call me? Just to ask that. The other end of the line replied, Yes. Jin-won annoyed. The train's here. I'm hanging up. The other end hastily said, Hey, I gave you a lot of useful dating advice. I have to know. Tell me. I want to know. Jin-won didn't want to, so he hung up abruptly. As Jin-won meandered along the familiar streets toward home, his mind buzzed with anticipation, swirling with thoughts of the surprise Ginga had mentioned. I wonder what Ginga has for me when I get back? The idea of a special gift or unexpected gesture sparked a glimmer of excitement within him, mingling with a hint of curiosity. Lost in his musings, Jinwon's imagination took flight, conjuring up wild scenarios of what Ginga's surprise could entail. However, amidst the excitement, a nagging doubt crept into Jinwon's mind. Could Ginga's sudden generosity be a sign of something amiss? Was there a hidden agenda behind the gesture? Jinwon couldn't help but entertain the idea that Ginga's actions might be fueled by loneliness or a desperate bid for attention. After thinking for a while, he concluded, maybe Ginga's gone crazy because he doesn't have a girlfriend. And then all the faults will be attributed to Ginga's little brother. If anything happens, I just need to kick Ginga's butt once and I'll be safe. As he turned the corner onto their street, Jin-won couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at him. The familiar sights and sounds of home offered little solace as his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Caught between excitement and apprehension, Jin-won braced himself for whatever surprise awaited him behind the door. As Jin-won stepped into the familiar warmth of their home, he noticed Ginga bustling about in the kitchen, his hands deftly moving amidst bottles and glasses. Intrigued, Jin-won approached, curiosity piqued by his brother's unusual activity. What are you up to? He inquired, peering over Ginga's shoulder. Ginga turned with a bright smile, his eyes alight with excitement. I've been practicing making cocktails, he explained eagerly. I know how much you enjoy them, so I wanted to surprise you with one. However, Jin-won hesitated, feeling a pang of reluctance. He wasn't in the mood for a drink, but he didn't want to disappoint Ginga either. With a gentle push, he nudged the glass away, accidentally causing its contents to spill onto the counter. Instantly, Jin-won regretted his actions as he saw the crestfallen expression on Ginga's face. Guilt gnawed at him, knowing he had inadvertently dashed Ginga's efforts. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice tinged with remorse. I didn't mean to. Ginga's disappointment was palpable as he spoke softly. It's okay. It's just that. It's the first time I've tried making a cocktail. Unable to bear seeing Ginga sad, Jin-won relented. I'll try it, he offered, mustering a smile to ease the tension. Ginga's face lit up with renewed hope, and he set about preparing another drink with renewed enthusiasm. As Jin-won accepted the freshly made cocktail, he couldn't help but feel touched by Ginga's gesture. The aroma of the drink wafted up, tantalizing his senses, and he took a tentative sip, savoring the blend of flavors. It's good, he admitted, a genuine smile spreading across his face. But Ginga wasn't finished yet. With a mischievous twinkle in his eye, he produced a small box of chocolates, offering it to Jin-won with a grin. Here, try this too. I heard it pairs well with cocktails. Jinwon's cheeks flushed with warmth as he accepted the chocolates, touched by Ginga's thoughtfulness. Thank you, he murmured gratefully, popping a piece of chocolate into his mouth. The sweetness of the chocolate mingled with the lingering taste of the cocktail, creating a delightful sensation on his palate. As Jin-won savored the last sip of the cocktail Ginga had crafted, he couldn't help but marvel at Ginga's talent. The drink was a symphony of flavors, each note perfectly balanced, despite it being Ginga's first attempt. Jin-won found himself pleasantly surprised by Ginga's hidden skill, a testament to his brother's versatility and determination. Suddenly, Jinwon's little brother waved at him, so Jin-won quickly said, I'm going to take a shower. Then Jin-won silently dealt with it. But Ginga, sensing Jinwon's intention to leave, Ginga reached out and gently held him back, his expression one of understanding and to help Jin-won. As Jin-won lay on his bed, lost in thought, His mind replayed Ginga's words about chocolate and cocktails, a curious notion that had caught him off guard. Suddenly, it clicked in his mind like a puzzle piece fitting perfectly into place. So that's why they go together? He mused aloud, his eyes widening in realization as the connection dawned on him. Just then, the door creaked open, and Ginga's voice cut through Jinwon's reverie and asked, "Hyung, did you say you were going to take a shower? Right?" Startled by the sudden intrusion, Jinwon jolted upright, his heart racing as he turned to face Ginga. "What's going on? Why didn't you knock before coming in?" Jinwon exclaimed, a mix of surprise and frustration evident in his tone. He hastily scrambled off the bed, ushering Ginga out of the room with an urgency born of embarrassment, and firmly shutting the door behind him with a resounding thud. During the group meeting in the classroom, Ginga's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all centered around Jinwon. He found himself unable to concentrate on the discussion at hand. With furrowed brows, Ginga mulled over their interactions, trying to decipher Jinwon's actions and reactions, as if he held the key to unlocking a puzzle. As the discussion droned on, Ginga found himself lost in a reverie, envisioning scenarios where he and Jinwon were more than just brothers, where they shared a deeper connection. He imagined moments of intimacy and shared laughter, his heart swelling with longing at the mere thought of it. Despite Jinwon's guarded demeanor, Ginga couldn't shake the desire to bridge the gap between them, to break down the walls Jinwon had erected around himself. Lost in his own world, Ginga couldn't contain the laughter that bubbled up inside him, his imagination painting vivid pictures of a future he longed to bring to fruition. Unbeknownst to him, his sudden outburst of joy drew curious glances from his peers, who couldn't understand what could possibly be so amusing about their discussion on homework. Attempting to redirect the conversation to his own pressing thoughts, Ginga interjected with a question that had been plaguing his mind. "Hey, how do you ask someone out?" His classmates exchanged bemused glances before offering their simple advice, "Just become a couple." Ginga seemed to absorb that, and just then Jinwon arrived to pick up Ginga. In the car, Jinwon's expression betrayed a hint of genuine surprise as he glanced sideways at Ginga, his brows slightly furrowed in confusion. "I'm surprised. I thought you didn't have any friends," he remarked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Ginga, lounging back in his seat, appeared nonchalant, his features relaxed as he shrugged in response. "Friends? What are you talking about?" Jinwon's surprise only deepened, prompting him to turn fully towards Ginga, his gaze searching for any sign of deceit. "The people you were with just now," he clarified, his voice laced with incredulity. Ginga's response was characteristically cool, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips as he shook his head dismissively. "Huh? I don't know them," he confessed easily, his tone betraying a hint of mischief. "I just asked a few questions." But before Jinwon could fully process the unexpected turn of events, Ginga's voice broke through his reverie, drawing his attention back to the present. "But Hyung," Ginga continued, his tone suddenly earnest as he fixed Jinwon with a pleading gaze, "cancel all your plans for tomorrow and come to the amusement park with me." As the morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, Jinwon and Ginga made their way through the bustling amusement park, the air alive with the sounds of laughter and excitement. Jinwon's eyes darted around, taking in the sight of couples strolling hand in hand, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Wait here for a moment," Ginga exclaimed suddenly, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he dashed off towards a nearby stall. Jinwon watched him go, a curious smile playing on his lips as he wondered what he was up to. When Ginga returned, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips, Jinwon couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. His amusement turned to surprise as Ginga deftly placed bunny ear clips on his head, the colorful accessories perched atop his hair. "You look cuter than I thought," Ginga teased, his voice filled with genuine affection. Jinwon's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, his protests falling on deaf ears as Ginga urged him to embrace the playful gesture. "Hey, this is strange. This is only for couples in love," Jinwon protested, his voice laced with laughter. But Ginga merely chuckled in response, gesturing towards two guys nearby sporting similar accessories. Those two are wearing them too. Wear it, Hyung. Come on, it's fun, he insisted, his eyes twinkling with excitement. With a reluctant smile, Jin-won relented, accepting the bunny ears with a soft chuckle as he allowed himself to be swept up in the playful atmosphere. Throughout the day, they embarked on a whirlwind of thrilling rides and adventurous games, the excitement palpable in the air as they laughed and joked together. But when they came across the haunted house ride, Jinwon's fear of ghosts reared its head, causing him to hesitate. Ginga, ever attentive to Jinwon's feelings, immediately sensed his apprehension and suggested they skip the ride. Jinwon breathed a sigh of relief, and they moved on to the roller coaster. As they played, Jinwon found himself clinging to Ginga's hand, and as he glanced over at Ginga, he couldn't help but admire how cool and handsome he looked, his features illuminated by the vibrant lights of the park. Finally, as evening descended and the sky exploded in a kaleidoscope of colors, Jin-won and Ginga found themselves atop the Ferris wheel, gazing out at the breathtaking sight of fireworks painting the sky. In that moment, surrounded by the magic of the night, Ginga reached out and gently took Jinwon's hand in his own, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through Jinwon's veins. "It's wonderful to go out like this with someone you like," Ginga murmured, his voice soft with emotion. And as Jin-won looked into Ginga's eyes, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. If I weren't Ginga's uncle, would I reject him? But in the midst of the enchanting moment, such thoughts were quickly forgotten, replaced by the simple joy of being together. As soon as they entered the house, they immediately got into it, making everyone curious. The previous part was just a warm-up. Now the dramatic part begins. As Jae-young-ha uttered those three simple words, "I love you," Jin-won felt a flutter in his chest, a stirring of emotions he hadn't anticipated. It was as if a dam had burst, flooding his senses with a rush of conflicting feelings. As Jin-won settled into bed, he couldn't shake the sensation of Younga's strong hands enveloping him, anchoring him to the present moment. There was a comfort in the warmth of Younga's embrace, a sense of safety that Jin-won hadn't realized he craved until now. But beneath the surface of his contentment, Jin-won felt a twinge of unease, a nagging doubt that refused to be ignored. Despite the tenderness in Younga's touch, there was a weight pressing on Jinwon's heart, a burden he couldn't quite identify. Lost in his thoughts, Jin-won couldn't help but question his own sanity. How could he feel this way, torn between the comfort of Younga's love and the heaviness in his heart? It was a paradox he couldn't unravel, a puzzle with no clear solution. As sleep finally claimed him, Jin-won drifted into a restless slumber, his mind swirling with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Little did he know, the journey to understanding his own heart had only just begun. While cleaning up the battlefield, Ji-wan-ji-ha called to ask how Jin-won was doing. Ji-wan-ji-ha was very worried about Jin-won because in the morning Ji-wan-ji-ha kept calling Jin-won, but Jin-won didn't wake up. Jin-won said that Jin-won was okay and Jin-won was very fine. Ji-wan-ji-ha told Jin-won not to worry. Ji-wan-ji-ha wouldn't force Jin-won to date Ji-wan-ji-ha just because they had sex a few times. Even so, Ji-wan-ji-ha will still like Jin-won. Ji-wan-ji-ha knew that Jin-won was in a difficult situation. Jin-won felt during the conversation that he intended to give in to Jin-won, even though Ji-wan-ji-ha was a very stubborn person. Suddenly Jin-won remembered his first love. Jin-won liked a girl and that girl also had feelings for Jin-won. Thinking back, that was funny. When you have feelings for someone, that feeling of disgust gradually becomes more important. Jin-won thinks that he has to solve this problem before Jin-won gets deep into it and can't get out. Jin-won called and told Jin-won's sister to find another housekeeper. After a month Jin-won would quit his job. Jin-won wanted to tell Ji-wan-ji-ha, but seeing Ji-wan-ji-ha so happy, Jin-won didn't dare to say it. While eating, Ji-wan-ji-ha asked Jin-won why he wore a scarf while eating. Jin-won said it was to hide Ginga's hickey, because he found the turtleneck too itchy, so Jin-won chose to wear it. Ji-wan-ji-ha told Jin-won to take it off, because there were only two of them here, so there was no need to worry. Ji-wan-ji-ha looked at the hickeys on Jin-won's body and felt they were beautiful. When facing this face of Ji-wan-ji-ha, Jin-won lost his reason. Perhaps Jin-won has fallen in love with Gyung-ha. Jin-won didn't have enough courage when he saw Gyung-ha disappointed after Jin-won said they should stop. Jin-won knew that Jin-won should end this relationship, but Jin-won's heart didn't want to do that. Jin-won couldn't say those words. Perhaps this is Jin-won's own selfishness, but Jin-won wants Gyung-ha to be happy in the remaining 2 weeks. After that, Jin-won went to the real estate app and chose a house after Jin-won quit working at Ginga's place. This is Jin-won's first step in many ways that Jin-won has thought of. Only this way is the best. That day, Jin-won's sister asked Jin-won why he suddenly wanted to give up. Jin-won said that because Jin-won wanted to focus on the exam and seeing that Gyung-ha was also close to him. Gyung-ha could also take care of Gyung-ha himself, so Jin-won didn't need to help Gyung-ha anymore. I know you two have been together for so long that it's hard to say goodbye. Jin-won said that Jin-won will leave here in a week. While watching TV, Gyung-ha accidentally saw a video of a cat. Seeing that Gyung-ha seemed to like cats, Jin-won asked Gyung-ha why he didn't raise one. Gyung-ha said that Gyung-ha didn't have time to take care of it. Leaving it alone would be a pity for it. Jin-won thought to himself, sometimes Jin-won couldn't understand what Gyung-ha said, as if Gyung-ha unconsciously spoke his mind. Sometimes Jin-won feels annoyed because Jin-won cannot appease Gyung-ha like Jin-won wants. And time just passed regardless of whether Jin-won wanted it or not. Gyung-ha called Jin-won out to give Jin-won a watch. This is a gift to celebrate Jin-won moving to live with Gyung-ha for 100 days. Jin-won didn't expect Gyung-ha to care about Jin-won like that. Gyung-ha says it's very important to Gyung-ha. Meanwhile, Jin-won felt like Jin-won's wrist was on fire, with a feeling of guilt, but also a bit of excitement. Jin-won really liked it, but told Gyung-ha that Jin-won didn't need it. Gyung-ha thought Jin-won was afraid it was expensive, so he said it's okay. It's only 700,000 won, about 14 million. Gyung-ha said that Gyung-ha made Jin-won feel uncomfortable, so he apologized to Jin-won sincerely, but Jin-won didn't think so. The one apologizing should be Jin-won. Jin-won feels that Jin-won does not deserve Ginga's affection. Both of them didn't have much time left. Jin-won liked Gyung-ha, but Jin-won had to say goodbye.
Ganhason.
If Jin-won continues like this, Gyung-ha will be hurt. But Jin-won still wants to treat Gyung-ha well. All these thoughts kept going crazy in Jin-won's head. Jin-won couldn't think clearly anymore. Jin-won also doesn't know what he's doing anymore. After a few small rounds, Jin-won was so tired that he fell asleep. Gyung-ha gently walked over to caress Jin-won, then helped Jin-won wash up. Gyung-ha doesn't feel so tired in his heart anymore. Gyung-ha knows that Jin-won likes Gyung-ha, but Jin-won doesn't want to accept it. So Jin-won avoids Gyung-ha. But it's okay because time will tell everything. Gyung-ha will wait until Jin-won accepts this feeling. That's what Gyung-ha needs to do. But Gyung-ha doesn't know why Gyung-ha always feels insecure inside. The next morning, Gyung-ha had to go see the TR Jinwon exhibition before the family, because Ginga's grandmother wanted Gyung-ha to go there. Before leaving, Gyung-ha gently touched Jinwon's cheek and told Jin-won not to skip meals. Jin-won had to cook something and eat it deliciously. Seeing Jinwon's face filled with fatigue, Gyung-ha was worried. But Jin-won told Gyung-ha that Jin-won was okay. It was because Jin-won stayed up late to study. After that, Jin-won told Gyung-ha to quickly go to his family's place. See you tomorrow, and then gave Gyung-ha a kiss goodbye. At this time, Gyung-ha was drinking tea and talking with his grandmother. After that, Ginga's grandmother asked Gyung-ha why didn't Gyung-ha go back to his family. There will be many things to worry about when living alone. She thinks it will be better if Gyung-ha stays with his parents until Gyung-ha graduates. Gyung-ha said that Gyung-ha had an uncle to take care of his, so she didn't need to worry. She told Gyung-ha that he would only take care of Gyung-ha this month, so she called a new maid for Gyung-ha. Gyung-ha doesn't understand what's going on. After returning home, I saw Jin-won talking to the new maid. At this time, Ginga's face darkened. Then he asked the maid if he could leave, because Jiwa had something to tell Jinwon. Jiwa asked Jinwon if there was anything he wanted to tell Jiwa. Jinwon apologized for not telling Jiwa sooner. Without waiting for Jinwon to finish speaking, Jiwa pushed Jinwon against the wall. It seemed like Jinwon didn't remember Jiwa saying what Jiwa would do to Jinwon if Jinwon ran away. He said that Jinwon didn't forget, it was just Jinwon pretending. If it makes Jiwa happy, then Jiwa just do it. Jiwa asked Jinwon what was going on just yesterday. Both of them were very happy, but Jinwon told Jiwa that this is not as simple as Jiwa thinks, and this relationship needs to end. Jiwa couldn't believe that the two of them hadn't officially known each other yet. Why did Jinwon think like that? Jinwon didn't need to make it public. Jiwa just didn't wait for Jiwa to finish talking. Jinwon told Jiwa to stop being stupid. Stop pretending and accept the truth. You both need to stop this. This shouldn't have happened in the first place. Jinwon blames himself. Jinwon should have told Jiwa everything clearly, but Jinwon didn't do. Jiwa repeated what Jinwon had said to Jiwa before. He couldn't choose who he liked. Jinwon couldn't control Jinwon's feelings. He didn't have time to stop and think about who to choose. Both of them simply fell in love, but why couldn't Jinwon do the same as him? Jinwon interrupted Jiwa and said that maybe this was Ginga's first time. But Jinwon knew how this relationship would end. When the small differences piled up, the two people who seemed inseparable would end up as strangers, and the days spent together will disappear from his life. Good memories will turn into nightmares that Jiwa won't want to forget. Jinwon doesn't want that to happen to him. Jiwa said that Jiwa wouldn't be like that, but Jiwa couldn't say anything in advance. Jiwa loudly told Jinwon that we both don't know. So why keep thinking about it, let's just start. And before finishing speaking, Jinwon immediately told Jiwa that Jiwa thinks this uncle-nephew relationship can really be possible. Why? Love can't solve everything, and this is when Jiwa has to face the truth. Ginga's tears fell down. Jiwa said that Jiwa didn't want to end like that. Why did Jinwon always decide everything if Jinwon determined everything like that? Why did Jinwon still treat him well? Jinwon told Jiwa that because Jinwon feels guilty and Jinwon doesn't know what Jinwon should do. If Jinwon felt guilty, Jinwon shouldn't have done this. Jinwon thought it would be better for Jinwon to do this. So he treated Jiwa well one last time and then secretly left his life. No matter what Jinwon says, Jiwa is making a fool of himself. Jiwa fell too deeply into this dream and was betrayed by Jinwon. Jinwon said Jinwon had prepared for this, so let's play around one last time. And then Jinwon did what Jiwa told him, and the punishment process began.